Welcome back to the Global Excel Summit, day one. I've just been preparing for our education session by reading my latest book, Quantum Computing for Babies. It's pitched at just the right level for me, maybe a little bit advanced, but I'm reading it a few times to get up to speed with it. We are talking about Excel in education today. I honestly think my career might have been a little bit more easy if I had actually received a proper Excel education right through school. That's what we're going to be talking about. So welcome to everybody. We've got Sherry and Steve from Microsoft. So you can post everything that you want Microsoft to do, from investing in your AI company to what needs to come next in Excel in the chat, and we'll pass it on to them. We have Chris from Maven Analytics, and we've got Jason from Sheetcast, who's back for round two. Let's maybe start with you, Sherry. Let's talk about, it's quite fascinating for a company to hire somebody who comes from an educational background, and what's the idea behind that, and where's Microsoft coming from? I guess it's useful for them, right, if people know how to use their tools properly.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's very exciting to be a part of the Global Excel Summit. So hello, everyone. So yes, I joined Microsoft recently, and to really advance our programs that we have within Excel, our EDU programs that are focused on Excel. So in Microsoft, we've had some really innovative programs. Namely Hacking STEM has been around for about 7 years, that integrates Excel and using Excel in real-world problem-solving, hands-on, projects for kids starting as early as elementary school. So the belief is that we really want to empower all students and really prepare students to be future ready. And one of those avenues is really thinking about data literacy, data science, and preparing students for a world where AI is ever important. So I'm honored to be on the Excel team and learning every day about how to best make Excel accessible for the K-12 education space.
Amazing. Steve, before I get to Steve, actually, I just want to say something. I sometimes attend or host these summits and conferences, and I feel like asking a bit of the question, what am I, chopped liver? We started with Layla Garani, who in this morning got wedding proposals, marriage proposals. Layla, you're awesome in the chat. Now we've got Chris, love Chris Dudden. Hi, Chris, your videos are amazing. I feel like, guys, just throw me a compliment, make one
You're
up.
Great
even.
too, Matthew.
It's ChatGPT. Anyway, let's head over to Steve. So, Steve, a little bit about what you do. You're product manager at Excel. Excel is probably one of the first tools that most people become familiar with when it's used as a calculator, right, in corporates, but obviously a lot more advanced. It's using it everywhere from engineering to finance. We were talking about wind farms, financing wind farms and analyzing distributions of wind speed and the Weibull distribution in Excel. There's obviously a lot of room there. So how do you manage this? You can't teach everybody everything about this tool that you do. And what do you think about from a project management perspective?
Yeah, so I can just talk about my role with really working with Sherry and trying to improve our offerings that we have at Microsoft. So, Sherry brings the world of knowledge of how to educate kids, and I bring a lot of expertise about Excel. And there are a lot of technical challenges with what we're offering. So we're trying to put out lesson plans that teachers can just pick up and use, and we have to enable some technical things in the background to make those work, and also try to make it as simple as possible so that it's not a blocker for someone who may not be as confident in Excel, things like that. So that's really where I come in to this program in my role, and I'm passionate about education. I'm a father of 4, and I wish my kids knew more about Excel. Honestly, they've had some training, and I've tried to train them, but so I just have that passion. And I don't have a background in education, but I'm really happy to be working along Sherry, and as she's learning about Excel, I'm learning about education and what we can do to make things better. I think a big part of this that Sherry didn't really mention is that we want kids to use Excel as part of this. So yeah, it's great that Microsoft is helping to build some of these lesson plans and things like that. but we also want to make sure that they're using Excel when they do those. And that's where some of the more technical aspects come in.
I'm definitely going to be coming back to you and Sherry just now, especially talking about the younger generation and even myself, right? I think the attention span has become so short that if you're not going to be explaining something kind of like 5 seconds on videos, then or TikTok, then how do you get the message across? We're going to be talking about some of those challenges, but maybe let's head over to Chris. I think the compliments have finished in the chat now, so we can resume the discussion. Chris, I mean, talking about Maven, you've got a training company, you're out there training. When it comes to Excel in education, are you finding that people are using Excel as this amazing platform where you can actually learn about APIs, you can learn about data analytics, you can learn about data science? Or are you finding that the world of AI and these other programming languages blurs the lines a lot?
Yeah, so I think Excel was sorely lacking in my own educational experience. In fact, no one taught me Excel formally through high school or through my college experience. So I think there's a huge gap there. And one thing I often speak about and write about is the fact that Excel really is the best platform in the world for teaching core data literacy skills, helping people learn how to speak the language of data. So at Maven Analytics, we exist to help aspiring data professionals build these foundational analytics skills that they need to be successful on the job. And it all starts with Excel. That's how I got my first experience teaching back in the early days of online learning, 2014, 2015. No idea what I was doing, but I've learned a lot since then. And Excel still makes up a large part of our course library at Maven, along with other complementary tools like Power BI and SQL and Tableau and Python. So I think Excel is still absolutely critical for anyone who wants to build data literacy skills or pursue a career in a data-related role. And even with the revolution of AI and machine learning, I don't think that replaces the need for these skills that Excel is so good at teaching. So I think, in fact, that the demand for Excel skills is really only growing at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's often interesting to hear people who say, well, I don't really know about data. And I say, but you work in Excel every day, so you do. And I think this
Right.
world of data and analytics can often seem quite far away and something very intangible, but actually people are working in that every day. By the way, just a quick shout out to Sherry and Steve. One of the comments in the chat is, thanks to the carer caring about the future of my kids, they'll be better for this. And for people like you who are working with education. So nice to get that shout out from Karen there. Let's head over to the Sheetcast team, the one-man team. Jason, from your perspective, you're talking. The previous talk was awesome, right? Because you almost showed how people can actually create web apps and applications with Excel as a base. And we spoke about it as being a development platform. Are you finding that as people realize, hey, I can create a website or a web app or potentially monetize knowledge that I have in Excel, people are more keen to learn about Excel and put in the effort to educate themselves around it, realizing that, hey, this opens up a whole lot of possibilities for me afterwards?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this discussion and on this panel with all these other great participants. I consider this quite an honor. Education is something I'm super passionate about. I sit on a school board, and I have for many years. So this is near and dear to my heart from an education and from a technology standpoint. I definitely think that Sheetcast does bring an extra layer to the table. But before I talk about that, I think it's important to point out that from my perspective, Excel is how do I want to say this? It's more about the fundamental. I need an English class. It's more about the fundamental things that Excel teaches and Excel brings to the table. So at our school board, we talk a lot about critical thinking and civil discourse and these types of things. And civil discourse may seem odd to include in a conversation about Excel, but just get a bunch of first graders to decide what color theme should be applied to a chart. you'll find you need to teach some civil discourse. But I think it's more about, it's a great tool for learning how to learn. More foundational than the content itself. Content's readily available everywhere. We're all producing it. If you have a connected device, you can search out content. But learning how to learn, learning how to problem solve, learning how to think critically, learning in ways that are scalable. These are things that Excel just inherently brings to the table. And it's a shame for anybody to go through an education and not learn Excel. They learn a valuable tool that brings them into the workforce. There's not many office positions where you don't touch Excel in some way. It allows for you, when I talk about scalable learning, I'm talking about introducing complex concepts sooner at intellectually appropriate levels. So you can build a complex model predicting the growth of your classmates. You don't have to understand the model, but at an early age, but you can understand the inputs and the outputs. Excel is just such a great platform for all of these things. And as well, it leads to, some of the core logic and syntax kind of leads into development. And that's where I think, lastly, is the engagement piece. Most kids aren't interested in rows, columns, and spreadsheets and financial analysis. They don't even have money. They don't need financial analysis. But you can make it engaging by making the subject matter relevant to them. And I think Sheetcast allows you to then take it another step where now you can start sharing and building and innovating and creating on your own.
Absolutely. I love what you said there about the fact that it's this platform to learn other things. You can learn data analytics. I learned financial analysis and financial modeling in Excel. So it's like a learning platform, right? It's like one of these online course platforms that just allows you to learn all these different skills, but inside of this application. Sherry and Steve, I mentioned it earlier about the education, but I was joking with my book, Quantum Computing for Babies. But the fact is, the need to educate is becoming younger and younger, especially with STEM. People are saying, well, actually, I think this book's hilarious. By the way, I think my son's 3 years old, and if he understands quantum computing, I'll be super impressed. I don't really see the need to educate at that level, but and maybe it is useful. But the fact is, this need to educate is becoming younger and younger and younger. And at the same time, when you talk about the youth, as we said, when it comes to TikTok and videos, the attention span is not there. And the thing is, well, if you want something to be, watched now, it needs to be like 5 minutes maximum, because nobody can concentrate for longer than 5 minutes. So when it comes to educating, especially at a young age, how are you dealing with these two phenomena? The one, the fact that, what age do you start? And the second is how do you get these concepts across?
Right. That's a great question. And I think that engagement piece is one, bringing awareness to educators in the classroom and engaging the educators in the importance of, my background is bringing computer science into the K-8 space, or preschool to grade 8 space. So one, getting, educators really understanding the why and the how and the impact that, what that means for the students that are sitting in front of them in the classroom. Thinking about engagement, that's what we have worked really hard on with the programs that we have for kids that incorporate Excel. So what we've leveraged in the Hacking STEM and our FarmBeats for students is we utilize the data streamer. So students use, they're collecting their own data real time. So we have them using sensors, like in the FarmBeats for students curriculum. They're using a Raspberry Pi, they're making their own model, they're connecting multiple sensors, and then they plug it into Excel. And the excitement that students have when they're collecting their own data real time, and then taking that authentic data set and doing analysis and leveraging Excel with their data that they've collected from the environment. So many of our Hacking STEM projects do the same thing. So that level of engagement and excitement when kids are manipulating the environment and using sensors and then collecting their own data. So yes, of course, it's important for students to, leverage existing data sets, but I think that initial introduction where students have that authenticity and real life application and project is really powerful. So, and then from there, we launch into, really talking about that connection between sensors and small data sets, and then what that means into big data, how big data is important into leveraging machine learning, and then what that connection into AI. So we have a really intentional progression, but it really starts with the personal, local, and immediate. Like, how can students connect sensors and leverage their own small data sets to start? So that's one of the ways we do the book.
I'm ready. Subtract 30 years off my age and I'm age appropriate. Send me my kit. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and then Steve, how do you work with that? Then do you take this educational content and build that into the application, or how do you guys work together in terms of saying, well, we obviously want to educate people, but we also have these products that are kind of our revenue stream as a company?
Yeah, so I mean, we feel like the primary goal is the education piece. Of course, we want Excel to be the tool that's used, and we feel like if students get engaged at a young age, they'll feel comfortable with Excel and they'll continue using it. And that's just kind of, the side benefit is, hopefully Excel will be the tool of choice in the future. But that's not our primary concern. The primary concern is, we're trying to help out by providing these educational materials. The one thing I wanted to also add to kind of what Sherry said, she's obviously the expert on the education side, but I do want to say we want to really make it so that the educators themselves are comfortable with this. So, there are lots of teachers that may just not be comfortable with Excel. So we're doing a lot of work to make these lessons easy and have the instructions work, perfectly, and avoid get rid of roadblocks. We've had some of those, and we're trying to work through, like with the FarmBeats. We're literally going through with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that someone can just step through this lesson and it'll just work. So that's a really important part of it.
Amazing. I'm going to come later actually to the ecosystem of entrepreneurs that has arisen outside of this in the educational space. Jason, from your perspective, you're now taking this a step further. You're saying, well, you can create web apps based on Excel. What's the education? I mean, see there, it's quite interesting because when we talk about education, schools, STEM, obviously the internet is a large component of that. What is the internet? Creating websites, how does it all work? The ability to create your own website and your own web app based on your own Excel application is obviously a great way to teach that. How do you see that being converted to perhaps educational material?
Well, I think, again, it all comes back to engagement. And Sherry, you said something to the effect of immediate, local, and personal, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so key to engaging students and giving them a reason and an understanding of wanting to learn something. I say to my son all the time, if you have to do something that's not that interesting, ask yourself, how is this relevant? How can you make it relevant to yourself? And once you have that one question answered, typically the learning comes a lot easier after that. So Sheetcast, for example, I think plays a huge part in engagement, a huge part in making it personal. Because now I can take any information on any subject that I'm interested in, and I can create and share online that application, those tools, that information. And as soon as you go from self to community, you again expand the engagement and the interest of the students involved. So Excel gives a great platform for being able to connect and engage. Sheetcast adds a layer of community and creation that is beyond just the data and the content. And then I just want to say one other thing about teachers. I think the best way to engage teachers is to give them tools that they can use ad hoc in the classroom for the administration of learning. And I work with, and I know a lot of teachers that they do things with Post-it notes sometimes, shuffling them around on the wall. If they just knew how to use Excel, they would solve some of their own problems and become more engaged themselves in teaching their students.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask Chris one more question before I get to the really hard question. These are all the easy, getting us in the groove ones. Chris, from Maven Analytics perspective, from your perspective, we spoke briefly about this education and how this drive to educate younger and younger and younger and younger. At the same time, people are really time sensitive. They don't have a lot of time. Even myself, there's so many online courses I want to do, but struggling with time. From an online education perspective, how do you see this playing out? Are you seeing that people are using education more bite-sized chunks? Hey, I've got 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. How are you seeing people educating themselves and putting education still saying education is important? Yes, I've got a career, I've got a family, I've got a busy life, but education, continuous education is still important to me.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think a lot of it comes down to engagement, like Sherry and Jason were talking about, making it feel practical and tangible and relatable. And that's why everything that we teach using a case method. So you are playing the role of a hypothetical analyst for a company, and you're applying every skill that you're learning to some sort of real world project that simulates the on the job experience. And we think that's really important, not just for keeping people engaged, but for helping them see how their skills can actually be applied in the real world. I think that the bigger question about how this impacts the classroom learning experience is, I see a huge opportunity to adopt a hybrid learning model. And I think when we talk about traditional academic education versus online, we tend to talk in extremes, like, is online learning going to replace the traditional university model? Realistically, I think there's a lot of middle ground, and there's a lot of room to kind of capitalize on the best of both worlds. And this is something we've been piloting recently at Maven Analytics, where we're working with educators to help them assess their students' skills. We're building personalized learning plans, and we're introducing this hybrid model where we're tying together both asynchronous learning with the live in-classroom experience. And I think that's really important for a few reasons, because everyone learns in different ways. Everyone learns at their own pace. Everyone's starting from a different point, and forcing everyone in a classroom through the same experience on the same timeline, I think, runs the risk of isolating students who may need a different type of learning experience. So what we love about this asynchronous model is that it allows individuals to study asynchronously, build the skills that they need most on their own pace, and then come together in the classroom to discuss, to share their work, and to help each other grow. And I think and I hope that this is a model that we start seeing more and more of moving forward.
Highly customized learning. I love that. All right, now I'm going to start asking the difficult questions. This is stuff that we didn't chat about before. It wasn't in our pre-engagement email. But this is the Global Excel Summit. And in the globe, we have to face the fact that there is massive inequality. Mm-hmm. How do we drive education, drive Excel education, so important, drive STEM education, so important, in a world where there are many schools that don't have electricity, don't have computers? And I know, just not to give a shout out, but I know Microsoft does a lot in the space, and I've been involved with Microsoft in South Africa and Africa, and I know about the work that they do. But it's difficult, right? And there's some challenges globally, whether it's access to technology, access to electricity, and how do we deal with that? And is that our role as educators? Is it something we say, you can't solve for everything. We've provided some of the tools, but government or other parties need to come on board. Maybe just a quick one, and I know this is a difficult question, but is there anything that we can do to solve this? And Sherry, you're the one that's nodding the most, so I'll go to you first.
Well, I do really appreciate that topic of democratizing education, and more specifically, when we think about data science and data literacy for youngest learners. And also just thinking about equity and access, and that I think a lot about that pipeline. So we would love to see, of course, exposure to data science, the data science process, tools like Excel early on. But part of the pipeline is how the teacher, like especially in the US, and I'm assuming in other parts of the world as well, is the teacher preparatory program. So when you're an educator and you're coming out of university and you're getting your certificate to become an educator, oftentimes those programs that are preparing educators aren't necessarily exposing the future workforce to these tools, whether it be Excel or, like I said, my background is in bringing computer science to young learners. So there's just not that, that when we think about the pipeline, we also have to really consider the role of higher education. I'm not totally sure how to solve that, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that as a really important part of the pipeline. As far as democratizing these types of skills and bringing them around the world, I mean, that's one of the reasons at Microsoft we're committed to making all of our curriculum free. So all the resources that we've talked about here, all that curriculum is free for educators. The Hacking STEM resources, the reason that's called Hacking STEM and the intent on the design there was to use materials that you can either find in your home or at like the local drugstore. So things that are very easy to acquire and at low cost. So that, and then our Hacking STEM materials and resources are used widely around the world for that reason, because we wanted to try and leverage very low cost materials, and that's the reason we're calling it Hacking STEM, hacking the classroom. So we don't want to replace what's happening in the classroom, but rather supplant and really think about how teachers can integrate into what they're doing existing, what's happening in the existing classroom. And I think seeing that opportunity for integration and enhancement versus replacement is a really important piece to bringing all these things into the education space.
I love that term, democratizing education. I'm gonna come back to Steve just now, but I want to head over to you, Jason. So the internet obviously has changed the way that we live. And again, we live in a world where not everybody yet is online. Certainly not everybody's on a computer, but many people are on mobile phones, and even in many third world countries, that's the first way people get online is through a mobile phone, especially with the cheaper smartphones that are available today. Working again in a company that allows people to create web apps, etc. How do you see the democratization of that working? And do you think that actually creating web apps in Excel allows further democratization because people can access it now on a cheap Android device? So I might not be able to afford a laptop, an iPad, a computer, but I've got my Android device and I can now access some form of education and some form of tool to allow me to learn these STEM concepts.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, Matthew. And this part of the conversation is actually really valuable and important as well. I'll kind of go in reverse. I think Sheetcast is something that can help. How do I want to say this? It becomes somewhat of a pipeline. So you will have those that can create, that do have access, but they can share with those that don't have access through the building of apps. So they can start to engage with technology, start to engage with concepts that are built from spreadsheets. And I think Sheetcast has a role to play in that democratization and access, because you can access the mobile devices. So where resources are scarce, you may consolidate the creation but then you can expand the sharing, right? I also think it's super important. I mean, this is not a hard problem. This is not an easy problem to solve. It's incredibly complex. One of the things I always come back to is everybody should have an opportunity to be inspired. Whether they have access to the underlying technology, the underlying tools, the underlying resources, they should at least have an opportunity to be inspired. And I think that's where you need to bridge the gap while we're busy trying to solve the problems of how to get technology into places with no power. Those are big problems to solve. You can bridge the gap by preloading the content, the concepts, the learning, and then the inspiration that comes along with that. It doesn't take much to spark inspiration in a child. Giving them access to, I'll say Sheetcast, a Sheetcast app built from Excel, understanding the concepts and then seeing the results. That's an opportunity to say, you know what, I want to figure out how to get my hands on that technology so I can innovate, create my idea, and change my environment and my situation.
I love that, Steve. Before I come to you, maybe let's just, if you're listening to this panel, put in the chat, what was your greatest obstacle to learning Excel? Was it that you landed in an organization where you expected to know it but never had formal education? Was it the fact that you didn't learn the proper underlying concepts in school? I'm really interested. So pop that in the chat, in the comments, and we'll have a look at some of those. Steve, from your perspective, creating this product, democratizing it, I guess there's so many things that go in here, right? You have to democratize it for different ages, for different access levels, for different understanding levels, for people that talk different languages, even for people that have might have various disabilities where you can't see properly or hear. So there's so many things that go into a product. I never even thought about it until I started speaking about it now. How do you deal with all of that to make sure that people can learn Excel no matter their background?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I want to touch on is just something that we're doing with our education offerings now, and that is we recognize that not every school district has Windows laptops, right? So there's a cost to those that's higher than Chromebooks. We recognize that, and some of the programs we have right now, it requires Excel running on a desktop. So we're trying to overcome that hurdle by making all of our programs work just through a web browser. So you'll be able to just do it through Excel for the web, which is free. It can run on lower cost devices like Chromebooks. So that's just like a technical thing that we're trying to overcome. And then along with that, I'm glad you mentioned accessibility, because that's something that's a passion of mine, and it really has turned around a lot at Microsoft in the past decade with our CEO that we have now. And it is a lot of work to make the tools work for everybody, but it is something that's a high priority, and we spend a lot of time making sure that all the new features we build will work with screen readers and adaptive technology, and making sure that it's available for everybody to use, and that goes right in from the designing of a feature all the way through implementation of it. So that's something really important to us. But these are hard problems to solve. There's no magic bullet that just comes in one day and makes it all work. So it's just something we have to continue focusing on.
Absolutely. It reminds me, in my previous job, I put together a financial model, and I put together a graph that was terribly designed. The colors were all over the place. My boss said to me, "Matthew, are you colorblind?" I said, "Actually, I'm a bit colorblind." And I'm a bit colorblind, which is why every time you see me, I'm probably wearing a blue shirt. But it is, that's just a silly example, but there's so many things, and to make it accessible, that I think is so important. And I look at a lot of the applications that simply aren't accessible. And I think that thought that goes into it, I've seen it in Microsoft product, and I appreciate it. And I thought that's why I'd pointed out there. Well, some really interesting topics coming through, or some really interesting comments coming through on obstacles. A lot of it just on limited formal training and no training that was provided, not understanding the underlying. Chris, from your perspective, Maven Analytics, this a global sort of training hub, creating a democratized training, and I'm sure you see this in the different countries that you operate. There's all these different nuances. You spoke about we spoke earlier in the show about the fact that not every school might have a certain laptop. I know, for example, living in South Africa, we've got like about 4 to 5 power cuts a day. And there are all these different challenges that happen all over the world. Some areas don't even have power in the world. And how do you create training and still ensure that people aren't left behind in this technological revolution that's just going along so quickly? It's really easy to get left behind. Chris, what have you seen from around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the brutally honest answer is that I think we have a long way to go as a company as far as accessibility is concerned. Our learners tend to skew towards late stage learners who are current or former college or university students who are preparing to pursue a career. So, I love the concept of the STEM training where it's taking the learning experience offline and making it physical and tangible for countries that may not have access to stable or reliable internet access. I think that's a growth opportunity for us in the future. But I think when we think about making what we teach accessible to a broader community, I think the way I like to frame it is that we provide access to thousands of hours of modern technical training resources in a platform where people can not only learn, but also showcase their skills, build project portfolios, connect with peers, other experts, employers around the world at basically a cost that's comparable to a textbook. So in that sense, I feel like we are kind of trying to move things forward and make this quality level of education accessible to a larger audience. And we partner with platforms like Udemy that have done an amazing job with localized pricing, with captions and subtitles, and with accessibility features that make the learning experience smooth for as many people as possible. So that partnership is really important to us, and accessibility in general is something that we are striving to get better at every single day as our own business too.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. I don't know, there are so many great comments coming up in the chat, but Victor wrote, it wasn't even taught in school. You get out to the workplace and realize people use Excel more than they check their emails. And you just start fiddling around till you figure things out. It's really interesting. I mean, the comments coming through, Giles said, no formal training at school, all university. For me, it was pure sink or swim moment in my first role at work. I just swam. Giles, I must be honest, debatable if your Excel skills are still up to scratch. We'll see. But yeah, some interesting ones. Anne Walsh says, as a trainer, the biggest obstacles I see, I love this comment. Anne says, as a trainer, the biggest obstacle I see is the lack of understanding around setting up your data. It's not being well taught, so people end up hating it. And I think there is this risk, right, in education where something, and I think everybody's had this experience where they had a teacher that maybe they just didn't get on with or didn't like. They ended up hating the subject. and the fact that if something was not well taught, people would think, oh, well, I don't understand that topic. And for me, I studied electrical engineering, but there was this topic at university called signals and systems. And I hated it. And I realized, no, it was maybe just my learning style was different and something that I actually probably really enjoyed later on. And now it's all sort of, AI, etc. And I love that. And I love data science. And it's so interesting how you can look back and say, geez, why did I hate this topic so much at university? And it's so true. I think and that's why it's so important to have many different ways of teaching a topic. And different levels. And Chris, you mentioned the sort of asynchronous journey where, maybe Steve is going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but I take a slower route and there's nothing wrong with that. Or maybe the way I learn is through a very simple web app. And I love that. I mean, Sherry, from your perspective, how easy is it? Because when it comes to schools, when it comes to education, you've kind of got these set curriculums, right? So is it even possible to create these customized learning frameworks that work differently for different people? Or is that something that we're going to see in the future? Or is this a case of, well, this is the curriculum and, learn it or don't?
Oh, I love this question. So I think it's a few things. So one, I think it's as educators and teachers, what's the experience in the classroom and the role of the teacher? And I think having spent years of leading STEM initiatives, bringing engineering to like kindergarten through 6th grade, and working with educators to take a shift in their classroom to be the facilitator of learning, not necessarily the conveyor of all knowledge in the classroom, but allowing students having those experiences with open-ended projects, productive struggle. And I see something like learning Excel and becoming proficient, say in the workplace, back that up to what kinds of skills do as a young child need to learn. And one of those is productive struggle. And one, for teachers, for us to kind of step aside and allow students to have those experiences where there's not a binary answer. It's this or this. And I think we've conditioned, I was brought up in a school system like that, where things were very binary, right? It's true or false. You pick the right question, A, B, or C, the right answer, A, B, or C. But what's demanding in future work skills or current work skills is that people can wrestle with problems and take a hard look at things and come up with multiple solutions or angles to a particular problem. And I just think, at least in the American school system, I'm not sure we're centered around that kind of experience for students, which you play that out and what that means in the workforce. That being said, your question around curriculum, I think there's shifts that are occurring, but I think some subjects are more traditional than others as far as the way we look at problem solving, how we're organizing information, how students are taught to analyze problems and come up with multiple solutions, and all in a collaborative space, right? That's the other piece that's really critical, that we're teaching students how to problem solve, but collaboratively, and how are we working towards a goal. So I think I'm optimistic, but I also think, just pushing the boundaries of where we are in education. And when we think about the pivot point we're in right now with the integration of AI, and I do think, going to Chris's point, that personalized learning and differentiated learning is where it's going to be, because we're going to have programs that are going to be able to offer students customized learning based on what they currently know. The technology is there. It's getting smarter and smarter. It's up to educators to step aside and be facilitators of learning, not necessarily to be the ones that have to know everything, because the technology is there to teach the students, is what I think. Could be fairly controversial, but that's what I think.
I love that. I got so excited in your answer. I'm sure you saw me doing this. I love the idea of people working through problems and giving people the space in which to do that. Steve, I want to come to you now, and I actually want to reference this question from Catherine. It's not really a question, maybe a statement, and I completely attest to this because living in South Africa, I can say that this is 100% true. Catherine says, if you can create more Excel apps for cell phones, then people in Africa will have more accessibility. Cell phones are often easier to access than computers for the average person in Africa. I mentioned it earlier. That's definitely the case. Most people's first experience of technology and internet in Africa will be via some sort of cheap smartphone rather than a laptop or a computer. This is definitely the case, and I just want to hear your thoughts around this from Microsoft perspective.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I think from our education initiative, I don't think we've really done much to focus on how students could go through one of these lessons, for example, on a phone. But that's definitely something that we can start to take a look at and see what we can do there. I don't have a great answer, at the moment to talk about that. The one thing I can say, just from a general Excel perspective, is that the applications we have on phones and tablets are constantly getting better and better. One of the things we do is we listen to customer feedback, and that really guides where we're going to go with development. So we see everyone saying, I need this feature, I need this feature, I need this feature on all the devices. So it's not happening overnight. Obviously, there's a huge investment that we need to make to do some of these things, but we do try always to add new features that don't exist on the phones. And the more and more that we have there, the better things will be. That's not to say that we can't just develop some curriculums that kids could use on their phones today, but hopefully it'll be better in the future too.
Awesome. Sherry, I actually just want to come back to what you were saying. And one of the reasons I got so excited was because, this took me a while to learn as well as somebody who started to managing people. And I always thought when people asked me questions, I needed to know all the answers. And as I started to read books, and there's so many about this, lead with why, lead with questions, sort of say, well, actually, one of the best ways to lead and allow people to arrive at the answer themselves by asking questions, but guided questions. And it's a great way to learn as well. So I really loved what you said. Chris, maybe a question for you. And again, coming from some of the chat here, I mean, one of the comments was, one of the things we should do is create an ideal data set and make that available for people to learn what an ideal data set looks like. I'm guessing you do this for all of your courses as well.
To some extent, yes. There are times where sharing a nice, clean, tidy data set is the best way to teach a specific skill. That said, in the real world, we don't often or even ever get nice, tidy, clean data sets to work with. So we try to also really focus on the real world process of cleaning and QAing and prepping data for analysis, because if you've gone through a whole online course or program and all they've taught you is how to aggregate metrics or do some basic exploratory analysis on a perfectly formatted little table, you're in for a rude awakening when you land in the workforce and you realize that real data is a lot messier than that. So we try to kind of strike a balance there in the way that we teach.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, 100% correct. It's great to see the ideal, but definitely when you do land out there in the real world, data is just not clean. It's not complete. It's not accurate. It's usually not timely. So yeah, it makes things very difficult. We are running towards the end of our session, and it was really fascinating to hear. Maybe we'll go around the table and we'll start with you, Jason. And the question I've got is, if you could change one thing about the way that you were taught Excel, the way that you were taught, perhaps in Excel or STEM education, what would you change going forward? And do you think that change has been made? So looking back in how you were taught, what's one thing that you would have changed to make it maybe a little bit more appealing, a little bit easier for you to grasp?
Wow. I think you just asked me to write a thesis. I think when I look back at my education, there's kind of these landmark moments, and I think we all have them in our education, where a light bulb came on or a moment of inspiration that really stuck with us and kind of shaped our thoughts and our identities in some cases. And I think this all comes back to moments of pure engagement and inspiration kind of coming together at the same time. So again, I think about education much less in terms of content and more in terms of providing opportunities for inspiration, providing opportunities to problem solve and to struggle, providing opportunities to understand critical thinking and see how, in the case of data, how it can change your perspective quite quickly. I mean, I've looked at sales data thinking, oh, things are going terribly, the world is coming to an end. And then I look at the data and go, oh, I should be high-fiving and celebrating. Things are actually way better than they are. So I think it's just, if I were to change how I was educated, regardless of Excel or anything else, it would be more focus on those moments of inspiration, personalizing the content, making it relevant to me as a student, providing that instant feedback, which is another thing, by the way, that Excel is great at. I mean, I still to this day get great satisfaction out of hitting auto sum. It's instant, right? So all of those things, it's less about the content and more about those moments of inspiration, those moments of making it personal. I think that's what I would want more focus on for the future.
Awesome. Chris?
So I just real quick to address some of the comments that I'm seeing in the chat about a lot of people overestimating their Excel skills. I think if I were to go back and change one thing about my education, it would be, for one, for someone to teach me Excel period, because no one did, but also just to make it clear how powerful this program is. And I think the simple way to say it is that Excel is an incredibly sophisticated piece of software disguised as a simple spreadsheet. And for that reason, the Dunning-Kruger bias is very real here, where people with minimal skills tend to drastically overestimate their ability. I've been there. I did the same thing coming out of college. I would have rated myself, 8, 9 out of 10. And then I was humbled on the job when I realized, I was probably closer to a 3 or a 4. And I think that's a common pattern that we see all the time. And as people start peeling back layers of the onion and learning and exploring things like Power Query and DAX and Lambdas and TypeScript and dynamic arrays, they're like, oh my God, this is not just a simple spreadsheet. This is an incredibly robust analytical tool. And that insight, like that light bulb of realizing how powerful it could be, that's what's inspired me to start teaching Excel, because I wanted to share that same light bulb moment with every student I possibly could around the world. And, we talk about there's something like 750 million Excel users out there, but I would put money on the fact that more than 99% of those users are tapping into less than 1% of the functionality. And I would stand by that. As far as other ways that I would change my learning experience, I think going back to the engagement piece, I studied economics. I didn't retain any of the information from my core econ classes because we were talking about price elasticity of widgets and things that had no impact on my actual life and that I was passionate about. And the one course that completely changed it for me was a course called Sabermetrics, which is the statistical analysis of baseball. And I'm a huge baseball fan, come from a baseball family. And that was the first time in my educational career, and in fact, in my life, where I saw the combination of these tools and techniques that I was learning with a personal passion of mine. And for me, that's what made me pursue a career in analytics and eventually teaching this stuff too. So the more that you can combine passions, make it tangible for students, no matter their age, the more likely it is to stick and to inspire them.
I love that. And you're quite right. When I used to teach Excel, I don't anymore because I'm too busy learning about things like quantum computing. But when I used to teach Excel, I used to often just start off with an example of VBA or something and say, by the way, that's Excel. People would say, no, it's not. And I'd say, yeah, it's, it was automating everything. And just to show how powerful it was. And I even used to do that in very intro level Excel classes to show that we're only going to go through a little bit of it today, but Excel is a hugely powerful tool. If you're interested, you can go and do it. I think seeing what's possible is always so important when training people or educating people as well. Steve, from your perspective, what's one thing that you would have changed going back?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it has already been said. I think making it personal is a super important thing, which everyone has talked about. And that would have been great for me. I think I was learning, not Excel, but, I'm dating myself, just learning some basic computer things back when I was coming up. When I was in university then, I did have a professor that made it personal, and we just had a really creative project to work on. And you were just kind of really left up to say, here's a tool, and we want you to do, I'm not going to go into the details, but it was just a really creative, fun project. But there wasn't a lot of restriction on how you could get it done. And that for me really made it something that I remember that to this day, and it's probably 30 years ago or so when I learned all that. So that's a huge part of it. And then someone touched on the fact of just showing what the capabilities are, I think is sometimes more important than showing exactly how to do something. And one of the things I like to tell people about Excel is that it can be done. That's a slide I will just have in a presentation saying it can be done. So, you may not learn exactly how to do it here, but know that it can be done. And with the internet today, you can learn how to do just about everything with this. If you're a little bit good at searching, you can find incredible training materials and examples and everything. So that's kind of my thing. I wish that have, really been driven home to me that these are just tools, not restricted to just what I'm telling you. It can be done. Just, open up your mind and be creative with it.
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I put myself on mute there. Before I come to you, Sherry, I'll say, some of the comment, I love this comment from Patrick in the chat. There's a typical line in a CV, proficient in Microsoft Excel. Somebody else said that's the most common line in the history of CV writing is proficient in Microsoft Excel. The rest of the comments is pretty much a love letter to Chris Dutton. But some of the amazing comments and well done to you, right? I mean, I think some of these comments are amazing. John writing, I've taken every course Chris Hutton has on Udemy, and each one is absolutely fabulous.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
So there's some really, and I love this. Sounds like my favorite Excel maxim. If you think it, Excel can probably do it. That's very true. Sherry, what would you have changed? And I guess that's why you went into education, right? You're hoping to change some of the things that you would have changed that you experienced.
Oh, for sure. Thank you. This is a tough question to go last because I agree wholeheartedly with what everyone else has said on the panel. I think the only thing one thing I would add on would be, as a young girl, I would seek to erase implicit bias around gender, and now what I know more around race, and thinking about that implicit bias that I experienced as a child around STEM and science. That's one of the reasons I went later in my career into STEM education and promoting STEM and bringing engineering into classrooms starting in kindergarten, and really thinking about the importance of that for young learners is because, I grew up in a family, my dad was a scientist, but I was given really clear messages very early on that math and science were not for me. And so I think erasing that would have set, my mindset and my trajectory quite a bit different early on. And I'm grateful that, I've landed where I am, and I'm in an inclusive company and an inclusive, work with a lot of people who share that mission around equity and inclusion, and also, just really democratizing and providing for all. But I think that piece is really important, and that's what's so exciting to me with this Excel community, this global community, is to see the diversity and the women MVPs. I'm just so inspired because I didn't see those women or girls when I was a kid. So I think that is really critical as we seek to expand who is in this field and, who's good at using these tools. I just really believe that, we have the opportunity to really move forward and be more inclusive. And I think we're moving in the right direction. But looking back on my experiences, that was not the case.
I love it. That spoke to me so personally. My mother's disabled. She had polio when she was younger. So firstly, she was really viewed as being mentally disabled, even though she wasn't. And again, she would have been brilliant, and mathematical, etc., but didn't go into that field. And agreed. I'm so glad that things have changed, and we've got people like Layla, right, leading the charge, Excel legend, who opened up the summit. And then the final comment I absolutely just love. Danielle Brunton said, Sherry's dog was listening to all of the comments, and we saw your dog there in the kitchen or behind the glass. He's saying, it's my turn to get on the keyboard. Awesome, everybody. We are sure. How's that for good timing? 1 hour, 42 seconds. Thank you so much for joining this panel. Sherry, Steve, Chris, Jason. Awesome to learn from all of you, and everybody have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow for day 2 of the Global Excel Summit.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.